Some of the most iconic Pokemon are fighting type. Lucario, Blaziken, Infernape, Machamp, even Annihilape. These are some of the most beloved Pokemon ever. Please don't get mad at me when I tell you that actually not a single one of these Pokemon made it onto the list, despite the fact that all of them have been varying degrees of good. Because in the official competitive format, it's often the less memorable fighting types that have really shown. In fact, only 7 different fighting type Pokemon have ever won the Pokemon World Championships. And a lot of them are Pokemon that you actually might not expect, including the number 10 slot on our list, Toxicroak. Okay, Toxicroak might seem like a really silly addition to this list because, I mean, surely it's not as strong as a Pokemon like, I don't know, Mega Lucario, but you have to understand that Toxicroak is able to do things that really no other Pokemon can offer. First of all, Toxicroak is the 2009 Pokemon World Champion. It also won an international level event 10 years later and has won 2 regional level events. So, why are people using Toxicroak? It's not really because of its typing. Like, fighting and poison isn't a terrible combination, but you are quadruple weak to psychic moves, and you have a lot of other weaknesses as well, and it's not even like that strong of an offensive combo, so it's not because of the typing. The answer has to do really with its ability. Toxicroak is one of the few Pokemon in the game that gets access to the ability Dry Skin. This ability is kind of like a better version of Water Absorb, which is already a really good ability. It not only makes Toxicroak completely immune to all water type moves and heals it whenever it gets hit with one, but it also restores its HP in the rain. Rain has traditionally been one of the single strongest strategies in all of competitive Pokemon's history. That was a tongue twister. And so because of that, Toxicroak has found a specific niche for itself in the formats where rain teams are dominating. This was the case in 2009. Rain teams were extremely popular, so much so that a team that used only water type Pokemon finished 4th place at the World Championships. In more recent years though, rain teams primarily used Kyogre, a Pokemon that is really difficult to stop unless you have a dedicated answer for it. Toxicroak is not only great because it's immune to water moves and heals from the rain that Kyogre sets up, but it's also able to threaten decent damage back because as a fighting type, it gets the move Low Kick. Low Kick is a move that does damage the heavier the target is, and in formats where super powerful legendary Pokemon are legal, like Kyogre, Groudon, Dialga, Palkia, etc., Low Kick is pretty much always at its maximum power, which means it does quite a bit of damage. On top of just generally being good into Kyogre and able to do decent damage to a lot of the different restricted legendary Pokemon, Toxicroak also offers some decent team-wide support because it gets the move Fake Out. Fake Out is undoubtedly one of the strongest supporting moves in the game, as it allows you to temporarily stop one of your opponent's Pokemon from moving the first time your Pokemon has switched in. So basically, Toxicroak is able to fill all these different roles. It can be a really solid defensive switch in against teams that are relying on heavy water type damage. It can be an offensive Pokemon against the heavy restricted legendary Pokemon, and it can provide support for your team with the move Fake Out. Toxicroak is also able to use the move Sucker Punch, which isn't that remarkable of a move anymore, but before it was nerfed, it was actually a really powerful priority attack, meaning even though Toxicroak isn't the fastest Pokemon, it's still able to support its team by doing bits of chip damage with Sucker Punch before the opponent's attack. This was also useful even after the nerf because Pokemon like Lunala and Ultra Necrozma are weak to Sucker Punch, and so Toxicroak was still able to get some value here. It's been a couple of years since Toxicroak has seen really any usage, and even when it has seen usage, it was never super popular, like ever actually, but because it's a world champion, I definitely thought that it deserved its place on this list. You might get a bit of whiplash talking about this next Pokemon because while Toxicroak was totally respectable, it's not a Pokemon that I think many people would have expected to be on this list unless they watch a lot of competitive play. You're probably not surprised to see this next Pokemon, but you might have expected it to be a little bit higher. It's Zamazenta. Let me explain why it isn't higher up. Obviously, in a vacuum, Zamazenta is a far better Pokemon than Toxicroak. I mean, in terms of the stats, not really a comparison here. Also in terms of the typing and in terms of the move pool. So why are these Pokemon so close together on the list? Well, actually, Toxicroak has better results than Zamazenta, and that's because Zamazenta is something called a restricted legendary Pokemon. I was just talking a little bit about these with Toxicroak, but basically, restricted legendary Pokemon are Pokemon that are only ever legal in specific formats where you can only ever use 1 or 2 of them on your team. Because of this, they only tend to be legal for a fraction of the time of other non-restricted Pokemon, and when they are legal, they're they're not playing against, you know, Caterpie and Weedle and all those, you know, small dogs. They have to deal with the strongest Pokemon in the game, which are the other restricted legendary Pokemon. So basically, the only times that Zamazenta has been legal, Calyrex Shadow has been legal, Kyogre has been legal, Groudon has been legal, all these really powerful Pokemon are competing for a limited number of slots on the players' teams. And Zamazenta, when it first released, it was a joke. It was not a strong Pokemon. Despite being super tanky, it wasn't allowed to Dynamax, and that pretty much just made it a worse version of Zacian in every way. Yes, it was tankier, but it wasn't actually able to do any decent damage compared to Zacian, who was the best Pokemon in the game. It also didn't have any way of using its defense stat offensively in Sword and Shield, which changed in Scarlet and Violet, but at the time, yeah, like there was basically one player who really believed in Zamazenta, and they brought it to everything, but the results just weren't there. However, going into Scarlet and Violet, despite receiving several different nerfs, Zamazenta also got a huge buff in the form of the move Body Press. This is a move that does more damage the higher the user's defense stat is. And that's relevant here because not only is Zamazenta naturally very tanky, but its ability, Dauntless Shield, gives it a defense boost the first time it hits the field. And this defense boost is applied to Body Press. So now, for the first time, Zamazenta had a way of using its defense stat offensively. And it was also able to use its defense stat defensively. This was a Pokemon that was not only incredibly tanky, but it was also able to do good damage. It plays very differently than a lot of the other restricted Pokemon, which primarily just try to overwhelm the opponent with offense like from the get-go, or they try to set up and then overwhelm the opponent with offense that way. Zamazenta doesn't really play much like a setup Pokemon, and unlike many of the other restricted Pokemon, it only ever hits one opposing Pokemon at a time. Said Pokemon a lot there, please forgive me. This is a Pokemon video. But what Zamazenta really excels at is instead of hitting both Pokemon for, you know, a decent bit of damage, it hits just one for a lot. And because it's so tanky and so hard to remove, and it's a steel type, which gives it so many resistances, and it can actually terrestrialize, even though it still can't Dynamax, but Dynamax isn't even in the game anymore. It basically is this Pokemon that sits in the field, super annoying, hard to remove, and just does consistent damage turn after turn after turn while you're struggling to remove it. Plus, for some reason, despite being, you know, carrying around this giant shield, it's really fast. This offers a different way of playing the game that honestly is very different than any Pokemon I've ever seen used before, but it's a completely viable niche, and it's resulted in some decent set for Zamazenta, including 2 regional wins and a top 4 at last year's World Championships. Zamazenta also gets access to the move Wide Guard, which is one of the most valuable supporting moves in the game when there are restricted Pokemon legal. Wide Guard blocks all moves that are considered spread moves, which are moves that hit multiple targets, which is the main attack of many of the restricted Pokemon, such as Terrapagos, Calyrex Ice, Calyrex Shadow, Kyogre, Groudon, even Miraidon uses spread moves a fair bit of the time. The alternative Wide Guard users aren't considered generally the best in the current format, and so Zamazenta is actually able to work not only as this offensive Pokemon, but also as this defensive anti-meta threat where, although it can do damage on its own, if it's better positioned to supporting the team given the current board state, it's able to do that as well. Zamazenta is a Pokemon that I think is really interesting because it was really, really bad, and then it suddenly became viable and had a real shot to win the World Championships. But this video is about more than just Zamazenta, so if you're curious, you should check out the video I made on just Zamazenta because, yeah, I have a lot to say about it. You know, I could yap about fighting types for hours. They're just so cool. Do you ever wonder what music they listen to? Let's check in with Machamp. Huh, what is it that Machamp has got there? Oh, it must be the sponsor of today's video, Raycon. Riddle me this, dear viewer. What's better than a beautiful summer day? That's right, a beautiful summer day with your favorite music, a call with your good friends, or your favorite podcast. Raycon's everyday earbuds are the perfect summer accessory, letting you enjoy the sun without leaving premium audio behind. Raycon has sent me a couple pairs of their headphones over the years, and I use them when I go for runs. The funny story here is that I used to listen to no music because I didn't have any wireless earbuds when I would run, and I will say that I've been going on a lot more runs ever since I got these headphones and was able to, you know, listen to music and podcasts and stuff. It makes the running go faster. The park near my apartment where I go for my runs is like really popular. Like there's always a lot of people there. And so I really appreciate the active noise canceling on my everyday earbuds, which helps me stay in my zone and just, you know, focus on running in circles. And I can vouch for this from experience, but they are weatherproof. And so if you're like me and you don't check the weather before going outside and you're on your run, and then all of a sudden it starts to, you know, torrentially downpour, your everyday earbuds won't get ruined. Raycon earbuds have a long 32-hour battery life. So if you're like me and you forget to charge them often, it's normally okay. You just have to remember every once in a while. You can also get cool protective cases with fun designs. This is the one that I have. Can you see this? You can see this. Look at this. I like this one. It's very like galaxy space. I don't know. I like it. And it, like, I don't know how to describe it, but like it feels, it's like fun to touch. I don't know. I like it. I like these things. Anyway, if you want to get a pair of Raycon earbuds for yourself, go to buyraycon.com/Wolfey to get 15% off Raycon's best-selling everyday earbuds. Brought to you by Raycon. Okay, coming in at number 8 was a Pokemon that initially I didn't even have on this list. In fact, it was only after doing a fair bit of research that I decided it probably deserves to be here. It's one of the most recent fighting type Pokemon added to the game, Sneasler. What you have to understand about Sneasler is that while it hasn't been legal for very long, there was like a 4-month stretch where Sneasler became the best and most used Pokemon in the game, or top 3 if it wasn't number 1. And so despite the fact that it hasn't been legal for very long, and it was really only within that 4-month stretch that it saw major results, I still think it's worth mentioning here, because in that stretch, it won 3 different regional championships and placed highly at a number of other events as well. So Sneasler basically was able to pop off because following the 2024 World Championships, the rules changed and every single legendary Pokemon and Paradox Pokemon was temporarily banned from competitive play. This meant that many of the Pokemon that had been dominating the game were just suddenly nowhere to be found, and it really opened the door for Pokemon like Sneasler, who is a good Pokemon but couldn't keep up based on the other Pokemon around it when it was added, to suddenly shine and also just to take center stage. Sneasler's a new Pokemon added in Hisui, so it only became legal right around the time of the 2023 Pokemon World Championships, but it took Sneasler over a full year after being added before it saw any play. And that might be surprising because Sneasler has a lot going for it. First, it's very fast. It's not like the fastest Pokemon of all time, but it is very speedy and will outspeed most Pokemon that have a reasonable or even slightly above reasonable speed stat. Sneasler's actually able to outspeed pretty much every Pokemon in the game thanks to its ability Unburden, which doubles its speed stat after one of its items is consumed. You can actually run specific items that will more or less guarantee this, like the Psychic Seed if you have Psychic Terrain on your team, or the White Herb, which you can use to reset any stat drops your opponent tries to give you, but you can also activate yourself with Close Combat, which lowers your stats. There's basically no Pokemon in the game that can outspeed Sneasler after Unburden without some major help, and with Unburden active, it will even outspeed some Pokemon inside of Tailwind. On top of just being fast though, Sneasler is quite strong, and it's able to use one of the best parts of being a fighting type, which is access to the move Close Combat. This move is just very powerful and very consistent. It does have the drawback of lowering both your defensive stats, but normally this is worth it just given how powerful the attack is. Really though, the move that makes Sneasler memorable is not Close Combat. It's its signature move, Dire Claw, which has a whopping 50% chance to get a status condition. A third of the time that it gets a status condition, it will be poison. A third of the time it will be paralysis, and a third of the time it will be sleep. Sleep is one of the most broken status conditions in the game, and paralysis isn't that far behind. And most of the ways that you can put an opposing Pokemon to sleep involves clicking a move that does no damage and oftentimes isn't even 100% accurate. So the fact that Sneasler can not only do good damage with its high attack stat and the decent power of Dire Claw, but also get asleep just for, doing damage in the first place is nuts. Sneasler could actually increase its odds of getting a status condition even more if it uses the ability Poison Touch, which gives all of its moves that make contact a chance to poison, and most of the moves that Sneasler uses make contact. This was a Pokemon that made players rage in a way that just is memorable, and I think we will remember for a long time to come. Dire Claw was a really frustrating move to deal with in general, and the fact that it was coming off of a Pokemon that was just so fast meant that oftentimes you had no choice except to let Sneasler launch a Dire Claw at you, and if it got that good roll of sleep or sometimes even paralysis, you'd be too far behind to recover. It also helped that in the format where Sneasler really dominated, fighting type coverage was really important, and there weren't that many good fighting types. Pokemon like Archaludon, Porygon 2, and Ursaluna, both of the Ursalunas actually, were just some of the best Pokemon in the game, and fighting was a weakness that they all shared. But apart from just being fast and strong and introducing a lot of luck in your favor and being a type that was really valuable, Sneasler could also support its team with more dedicated supporting moves. This normally took the form of Fake Out, which we've already talked about, and Coaching, which is a move that is almost exclusively given to fighting types and allows you to raise your partner's attack and defense stat every time it's used. This kind of boost might not sound super impactful, but depending on the partner you're enabling, it can actually be really scary. The presence of Coaching also just applied a lot of pressure on opponents because they would, be tempted to play defensively in front of Fake Out or like Dire Claw trying to get into a spot where they could, minimize the chances that they fall asleep. But then Sneasler could just click Coaching and take advantage of that defensive play. Overall, I would say that Sneasler is one of the most frustrating Pokemon to play against, at least in recent memory. And even though it's not seeing a ton of success anymore, it's only been out for a relatively short amount of time, so I can definitely imagine a world where it comes back with a vengeance later on. In the current format, Sneasler is not considered to be very good, but despite that, a player actually won a big all online tournament with Sneasler on their team, though they used Skunk Shot instead of Dire Claw. Personally, I would be okay if Sneasler never came back again, but I suspect that it will. Wait, never come back again? That's kind of harsh, right? That actually makes me feel kind of bad for Sneasler. I don't know. I feel like everybody likes to come back again, right? I mean, that's just human nature. And actually, not really related, but if you want to come back again and see more of these videos that we spend a lot of time on, you should subscribe. It's a good way of telling YouTube, hey, I want to come back again and see more content. The YouTube algorithm can be kind of finicky. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this. You ever watch a channel for a while and you're like, I love this, and then YouTube just stops showing you their videos? This happens to me. If it happens to you, think about subscribing. It's a win-win for all of us. Okay, let's talk about the number 7 slot on our list, which is a legendary Pokemon, but not a restricted legendary Pokemon, Terrakion. Terrakion fills a similar role to Sneasler in that it is a fast fighting type that hits very hard, that also makes your opponent very angry. Terrakion was introduced in Black and White, and pretty much right out of the gate, it was immediately one of the best Pokemon in the game. It was so good, in fact, that it won the 2011 World Championships, which was the first World Championships it was legal for. It also got second place in 2012 of the World Championships, and has won at least 2 national championships and 3 regional championships. I say at least because a lot of the data from the events back in the day is not really recorded in one central place, and though we have some of it, it's not all of it. I suspect that Terrakion probably has a lot more results than what I've listed, but in terms of what I can find easily without doing, a lot of digging, this is what I've come up with. That being said, even if the results aren't totally accurate, I at least remember how strong Terrakion was and what it did because I was there for it. Terrakion is a fighting and a rock type Pokemon. Thanks to its high attack and speed stat, in addition to its good offensive typing, it was just a great offensive Pokemon for teams that were looking for either fighting or rock type coverage. Fighting and rock have pretty decent synergy offensively, as the rock type attacks can hit the flying and the bug types that resist fighting for super effective, and the fighting type attacks hit the steel Pokemon that resist rock. But Terrakion doesn't get a signature move like Sneasler, so why did it make people so angry? The thing is, even though this is the best fighting type list, Terrakion is also a rock type Pokemon. And by being a fast rock type Pokemon, it was able to use the move Rock Slide to pretty grand results. Rock Slide isn't the most powerful move, though it's also not the weakest, but the reason it's really memorable is that it hits both of your opponents and has a 30% chance to flinch whatever it hits. Assuming that you hit both targets with Rock Slide, you actually have above a 50% chance of flinching one of them. Of course, if you get really unlucky, both your Pokemon might flinch, or they might flinch for multiple turns in a row. On the one hand, a flinch isn't as debilitating as being put to sleep, but on the other hand, Terrakion had a much higher chance of getting a flinch than Sneasler did of rolling a Dire Claw, paralysis, or sleep. And back when Terrakion was really popular, the game was just overall slower, and so there weren't that many Pokemon that could attack before Rock Slide went off. Terrakion was also a pretty flexible Pokemon. It could use defensive items like the Focus Sash or the Chopo Berry, but it could also use offensive items like the Choice Scarf or the Life Orb, or, well, I mentioned that Terrakion got second at the World Championships. That was actually used by me, and I used Choice Band on Terrakion. This allowed me to use some of the more niche moves, like I won a set because of Quick Attack Terrakion, which isn't a move that you typically associate with the Pokemon, but I mean, it worked for me. Other than just being a generally useful, fast, and strong physical attacker though, Terrakion actually was the main Pokemon that I think of when it came to one particular strategy. The strategy I'm referring to is the combination of the attack Beat Up with the ability Justified. Beat Up is a move that hits once for every Pokemon in your party that hasn't fainted and isn't affected by a status condition. It's a dark type move that isn't very strong, but you aren't really using it for damage. In fact, the less damage you do, the better. It's used to attack your own Terrakion, who has the Justified ability, which gives it an attack boost every time it's hit with a dark type move. Beat Up actually counts as 4 separate attacks if you evolve your Pokemon healthy, and so it's able to immediately skyrocket Terrakion's attack to +4, effectively tripling it. When this happens, Terrakion starts doing ridiculous damage, and hitting both of your opponent's Pokemon with Rock Slide means that you not only are often just KOing them straight up, but even if they survive, you might flinch them and get off scot-free for the turn. This combination of Whimsicott and Terrakion has a cute name. It's called Terrakion, which I just think is funny and cute. It doesn't really matter, but I like it. Terrakion was one of the best Pokemon in Black and White, winning the World Championships in 2011, getting second in 2012, but it also saw a lot of success during X and Y. It was one of the best Pokemon there too, often paired with Mega Metagross, but certainly used in other compositions as well. However, in recent years, it certainly hasn't performed anywhere near as well as those glory days. I think the addition of the Fairy typing and just having better Fairy type Pokemon in general, in addition to like general power creep and the prevalence of Intimidate with Pokemon like Incineroar and Landorus Therian becoming more popular, it's made it really hard for Terrakion to pop off. It's a Pokemon that I think probably won't be that good going forward unless like just the right situations arise, but it was such a threat for so long that I think it's absolutely one of the best fighting type Pokemon of all time. Coming in at number 6 is a personal favorite of mine, Scrafty. Scrafty's won at least 3 national level events and at least 9 regional events. A third of those in both cases were just from me alone. This was one of my favorite Pokemon. I wasn't joking about that, and I used it quite a bit. It is worth noting that none of my regional wins with Scrafty are recorded on the site where we keep track of most of the tournament results, so it's possible it has even more than this, but similar to Terrakion, this is all I could easily find. Most of you probably don't really get Scrafty because it hasn't been good in quite some time. The best way that I can describe this Pokemon is imagine if Incineroar were like a balanced Pokemon, a fair Pokemon. It has the combination of Intimidate and Fake Out, which is also something that Incineroar has, but it doesn't like also have just everything that makes it ridiculous. Scrafty has worse defensive typing, a lower attack stat, and worse utility moves than Incineroar, and it was still a very, very solid Pokemon. This isn't even a knock on Scrafty, it just is a way to understand how broken Incineroar is. Anyway, despite being inferior to Incineroar, that's not really a statement because it's kind of true of every Pokemon in the game to some extent. And before Incineroar released, Scrafty was by far one of the best support Pokemon. With its decent defenses, it was able to switch in, lower the opponent's attack stat with Intimidate, and then provide some value with Fake Out. It worked as a general sponge because it was tanky, but it had a decent enough attack stat. It certainly wasn't good, but it was able to do some damage, especially if you trained it in its attack stat, relying more on its natural bulk rather than, bulking up its defenses even more. And actually, Scrafty was one of the best Pokemon in 2011 before I got access to Intimidate. I used it with the Moxie ability, as did most people, which is an ability that gives it an attack boost every time it takes a KO. Unlike most people at the time, I was using Trick Room, and so Moxie was actually pretty valuable for me because I could set Trick Room up, and if Scrafty ever took a KO, then it would become extremely threatening. It was also a great user of the move Drain Punch, which not only does damage but heals the user, because once Scrafty got an attack boost, it became very threatening because it was just doing so much damage with Drain Punch while healing alongside it. Similar to Terrakion, it was a great Pokemon in Black and White and in X and Y, and it also saw some use in Sun and Moon and in Sword and Shield, but only before Intimidate and Incineroar became legal. Similar to Terrakion as well, Scrafty is hurt a lot by the power creep of recent years, and of just like the fairy type in general. Back in the day, Scrafty didn't have to worry about its quadruple weakness to fairy, but dark and fighting typing is really awkward now that there's a Pokemon that can basically one-shot every Pokemon with this type, even with a weak move. This wouldn't be as big a deal if Scrafty were more offensive, but on a defensive Pokemon whose goal is really to stay alive, it's really uncomfortable to have a quadruple weakness to the best type in the game. Scrafty is a great Pokemon that unfortunately just can't really keep up with the strongest Pokemon of all time being a better version of it, but my hope is that one day in the future it will see a little bit of success again. Okay, we're now into the top 5, and frankly, the 5th slot is a Pokemon that I wanted to put much lower, but after looking at the results, I just couldn't justify it. It's Hariyama, who I think is a really funny Pokemon. This isn't really relevant to anything, but I think it's funny. When the trailers for Scarlet and Violet came out, there was this like one image that had Hariyama like in the TM menu, and I was personally convinced that it was a Paldean version of Hariyama, but really it was just like a shadow that like landed in a weird place. I don't know. It was stupid. Everyone thought I was stupid. I think I'm stupid. Anyway, Hariyama is a Pokemon that has really only been seen in a couple formats, but in those formats, it's performed quite well. Hariyama actually managed to win the 2010 World Championships, as well as a National Championship and 8 Regional Championships, all of which were won in 2017. Hariyama is basically strongest in early formats before the power level gets super high. What that means for anyone unaware is that normally when a new game releases, the Pokemon that are legal are very limited. It's typically only the Pokemon that you can catch in the base game. Sometimes even some of those Pokemon are banned. And in these formats, because there's just fewer Pokemon available, Pokemon that are kind of generally considered weaker are still able to perform because, yeah, the other Pokemon just aren't as strong. So in these early formats, Hariyama has been a menace. While it was certainly at its strongest during the first year of Sun and Moon, it also saw some decent results at the first tournament of 2023 in Scarlet and Violet, before the Paradox Pokemon like Fluttermane and, well, some of the others got added in. Hariyama is kind of like a more offensive version of Scrafty. It's a slow fighting type with Fake Out that supports its team, but unlike Scrafty, who's mainly there as a sponge or to reduce the opponent's damage, Hariyama actually works as a sweeper, doing tons of damage itself. It does this with a combination of the Flame Orb item and the Guts ability, which boosts its damage output to ridiculous levels. Of course, it's also able to play a more defensive role with the item Assault Vest and the ability Thick Fat, so you're not forced to use this offensive version. You can also lean into a more supportive, defensive version as well. Part of what made Hariyama so good was its relationship with the Trick Room Pokemon. For most of my time playing competitive Pokemon, the way that Trick Room teams worked is very different than they work now. Basically, you would have one Pokemon that was supposed to set Trick Room up, and then you'd have another Pokemon to help set Trick Room up, and then also do damage when Trick Room was set up. Hariyama filled this latter role where it could use Fake Out to help the bulky Trick Room setter set Trick Room, and then it could do a ton of damage inside Trick Room. Fake Out was especially useful for this because it not only stopped the target from moving for a turn, but that turn was needed for the Flame Orb to activate to allow Hariyama to get online. This kind of offensive support role doesn't really exist anymore because in recent years, the Pokemon that set Trick Room up have become the Pokemon who also do the damage. This is the case for Pokemon like Hatterene, who did really well inside of Sword and Shield, and also a little bit of Scarlet and Violet, and then also Pokemon like Calyrex Shadow, who do a ton of damage as well. When the Pokemon setting Trick Room up does a ton of damage, you want your support Pokemon to be more bulky and to enable it. Basically, you always want one support and one damage, and so if the Trick Room Pokemon is the damage Pokemon, then the support Pokemon has to be the defensive Pokemon. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. You would have a bulky Trick Room setter, you'd have an offensive attacker, and Hariyama was great at this. Hariyama was in part chosen as well because it has a great move pool. It gets moves like obviously Close Combat and all the other fighting moves, as well as the support move of Fake Out, but it also has other damaging attacks like Ice Punch, Knockoff, different ground moves like Earthquake, as well as some more like supportive or utility options such as Bullet Punch, Feint, and Wide Guard as well. It's a Pokemon that, similar to many of the other fighting types on this list, has suffered from power creep, but I think it could absolutely do well again in the future if the power level was low enough. The number 4 Pokemon in our slot is another of my personal favorites, Hitmontop. Hitmontop won the World Championships in 2016 when it was used by yours truly. On top of that, it's won at least 6 different national level events and at least 2 regionals, though I suspect that it's actually a lot higher than that. Of all the Pokemon we've talked about on this list so far, I would say that Hitmontop is kind of a fusion between Scrafty and Hariyama. It's a pure fighting type Pokemon that's not especially fast, and it has the combination of Fake Out and Intimidate to support its team, as well as moves like Wide Guard and Feint, which also provide a lot of team-wide support. However, it's not so slow that it actually wants to be inside of Trick Room, and so it tends to actually be a Pokemon that is used in part because of its ability to do damage with the strong fighting type attack of Close Combat. What's cool about Hitmontop is that it's had major success in a bunch of different formats. 2010 was the last year of Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, the last year of Generation 4, and the powerful restricted Pokemon were legal. Hitmontop was half of the most iconic duo from that year called Top Ogre, which was Hitmontop plus Kyogre. Kyogre was there to do massive water type damage, and Hitmontop was there to help support it with the Intimidate, lowering the opponent's attack stats, Fake Out to help buy Kyogre time, Feint to remove Protect, Helping Hand to boost the damage output, and some other situational tools as well. Although actually on this specific Top Ogre combo, Hitmontop would often drop Intimidate in favor of Technician, powering up moves like Fake Out but also Mach Punch, allowing it to do more damage to other restricted Pokemon. My understanding of this is that Water Spout was often doing a lot of damage but just barely not enough, and Mach Punch could not only break focus sashes, but it was also good coverage with water type damage, and it allowed Hitmontop to weaken targets before Kyogre moved and put them in range of Water Spout. Hitmontop wasn't legal the following year in the first year of Black and White, and then became one of the best Pokemon again as part of this kind of duo in 2012, the second year of Black and White, when paired with Volcarona, referred to affectionately as Top Moth. Though Hitmontop also paired well with many of the other big attackers of that format like Zapdos and Latios. Here, Hitmontop was able to use Fake Out, Intimidate, Wide Guard, Feint, Helping Hand, the normal support moves to support these really powerful special attackers, whether that was Latios doing big damage, Zapdos setting up Tailwind, or Volcarona using Quiver Dance to become extremely tanky and extremely powerful. Hitmontop in particular was great for Volcarona because not only did it resist the rock type moves, which Volcarona was very afraid of, but Volcarona was boosting its special defense with Quiver Dance, which Intimidate helped buff up the physical defense, and the most common and pretty much the only rock type move that people used was Rock Slide, which Hitmontop was able to fully block with Wide Guard. Hitmontop was able to take advantage of the unique items of Generation 5 called the Gems, which provided a one-time 50% power boost. Hitmontop was a great user of the Fighting Gem because it really wanted the power boost, but it didn't want the drawbacks that the Choice Band would provide or the Life Orb would provide, and so Fighting Gem Close Combat allowed Hitmontop to be both a supportive Pokemon with its ability and its moves, but also an offensive threat where if it hit anything for neutral damage, it would do so much damage. It was especially threatening to the rock type Pokemon, which again, Volcarona was quite afraid of. Of course, it's not like Fighting Gem was the only way to use Hitmontop. I got second at the World Championships in 2012 using Rest Chestoberry Hitmontop. I wanted to use it more for support, and I guess I valued staying alive more than another item, and Citrus Berry was taken because it was on my Executor. I don't think this was like the smartest decision, but it did get me second place at Worlds, so I shouldn't complain about it. You would think that this would be the best finish I would ever get with Hitmontop, but actually that would come 4 years years later at the 2016 World Championships, where I won the entire tournament with Hitmontop as my fighting type of choice. This was again a totally different way of using Hitmontop with the eject button item. This allowed my Hitmontop to serve not only as a supporting Pokemon with the usual suite of moves and Intimidate, but also as a way to bring in my more important restricted Pokemon without letting them take as much damage. I would often switch Hitmontop in, take a big attack intended for one of my restricted Pokemon, activate the eject button, and bring my restricted Pokemon in safely. Hitmontop was in many ways the backbone that held my team together, and I don't think that I could have won the World Championships without it. Similar to Scrafty, Hitmontop usage has dropped dramatically ever since Incineroar got Intimidate. Unlike Scrafty though, Hitmontop actually did win an Australian Regional in 2020, which was before Incineroar was added to Sword and Shield, but I mean still counts. One thing I will say about Hitmontop is I think that it's much more likely to be good again in the future compared to Pokemon like Scrafty, because it has access to these other supporting moves like Wide Guard and Feint, which are not only moves that Scrafty doesn't get, but that Incineroar doesn't get as well. For now, I'm probably going to speak it into existence. This allows Hitmontop to do something that Incineroar can't, and while Incineroar is generally going to be better just because it's the best Pokemon of all time, I think it does mean that there's a specific niche that Hitmontop could fill going forward. Personally, I love Hitmontop, so I hope that it comes back at some point. Okay, before we get to the top 3, let's talk about the honorable mentions. There's a lot of Pokemon here. My initial list for this in terms of Pokemon I was considering was close to 20 Pokemon, so there's a lot of good Pokemon that I like that I've had to leave off. The Pokemon I was closest to putting on this list was Komao. It's a really solid fighting and dragon type that has had success in a number of different formats. It's never been like the most used Pokemon in the format, or even one of the most used Pokemon in the formats, but it has at times been kind of its own unique strategy due to its signature Z move in Sun and Moon, as well as it being kind of the main Iron Defense Body Press Pokemon at a point during Scarlet and Violet. I would have put it on this list if I could have, but it just didn't have the results of some of the other Pokemon, so I left it off. I also initially had Annihilape on this list because, I mean, it feels like such a good Pokemon. Like initially I was going to put it at like 5th place, but then I started looking through the results and honestly, it's not actually that impressive. Like Annihilape has seen a lot of usage, but it hasn't seen that many wins. And although it's certainly a good Pokemon and probably would be around like 12th or 13th on this list, I like didn't think that I could put it on the list, despite the fact that it feels like an incredibly strong Pokemon that I'm always preparing for. I think that if Annihilape has a couple more good years, then I could definitely like put it on a list like this in the future. But for now, it doesn't make it on. Now let's talk about some of the fan favorites. Lucario. Lucario is a good Pokemon as well. It's seen success, a little bit of success outside of its Mega Form. Its Mega Form also saw a decent bit of success. It's a good Pokemon. It was a good Mega Evolution. It's just that a lot of the fighting types have seen a lot of success, and Lucario really has only seen a bit, and most of it's been with its Mega Evolution, which limits it primarily to Generation 6 and Generation 7. Mega Evolutions are coming back, and so I could see Mega Lucario, you know, in the right circumstances being really good, especially since it was never legal at a time when Inner Focus, which is one of the abilities of the base form, was buffed, which should give it a pretty major advantage going forward compared to when it was legal. But based on what's happened so far, good Pokemon. I like it. I think it's strong. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but it doesn't make it on the list. Blaziken. You're probably upset about Blaziken, right? Blaziken's really good in single battles, but in the official competitive format, it's not that it's bad. It has seen a little bit of success, but Mega Blaziken and regular Blaziken have always been pretty niche. It's not a bad Pokemon, but it's never been like, putting it in the B tier for Mega Evolutions would be generous. I wouldn't ever put it any higher, and something closer to like C tier would probably be more accurate. The thing about Blaziken is that like it only ever can hit one Pokemon unless you're clicking Rock Slide, which you're primarily only doing to try and get a flinch. And because of that, and because it's not actually that bulky, despite the fact that it is pretty hard, it's a physical attacker, it's affected by Intimidate, it's not that bulky, and it's also not that strong. Like it is strong, but it's not like game breaking by any means. It's a good Pokemon. It didn't make it onto the list. Let's talk about Machamp. Machamp is a Pokemon that I really like, and initially I thought might be on the list, but when I was looking at the results, it's just not, it just doesn't have the results. I'm really sorry. I like Machamp. I think it's cool. Machamp might have had a chance during Sword and Shield, except for the fact that Dynamax fighting type moves and poison type moves were weaker than other equivalent Dynamax moves, and that made it really hard to use them. Machamp is cool. Like it has some stuff going for it. It's not a bad Pokemon by any means, but it's never really been good. It's had a couple niche uses, but it's just kind of an awkward Pokemon, and there are normally better alternatives. There's a couple other great fighting type Pokemon that I wanted to talk about, but I just don't really have time for, like Infernape and Mienshao, and like Emboar, or like Mega Lopunny. I like all these Pokemon. I was considering all of them at first, but none of them were good enough to even make it into the honorable mentions. That was the honorable mention. The last two Pokemon I want to talk about in honorable mentions are two of the Ultra Beasts, Buzzwole and Pheromosa. Both these Pokemon had decent success in the first year of Sun and Moon, but neither of them had a ton of success outside of that. And while they have some things going for them, they just aren't as good as the other Pokemon on this list. They are good Pokemon. They've had results. I like both of them, honestly. And I used Pheromosa in Sword and Shield at a tournament where I think I was literally the only Pheromosa player. I think it's a cool Pokemon, but it doesn't really hold up anymore. compared to, yeah, some of the other fighting types. Now we're into the top 3, and I can tell you that every single one of the remaining fighting type Pokemon on this list won the world championship 2 times. That's part of the reason why we don't have more fighting type world champions, is because there's been a few that have been kind of hogging all the slots. So coming in at number 3 as one of undoubtedly the best fighting type Pokemon of all time is Conkeldurr. I love Conkeldurr. I think it's really funny. Conkeldurr is the 2011 and 2013 world champion, and it's won at least 3 national level events and at least 2 regional level events. Conkeldurr is in many ways the improved version of Hariyama. It functioned as this extremely strong physical attacker, but it was also able to keep itself alive because of how much Drain Punch did. Similar to Hariyama, it often used the Flame Orb item and the Guts ability to boost its power by 50% and make itself immune to all other status conditions. But rather than Hariyama, who was often just trying to get rid of the opponent as fast as possible with close combat, Conkeldurr was able to have a lot better staying power because of its access to Mach Punch, which let it finish off faster low HP targets, its better physical bulk, and its higher attack stat. Because of this, and maybe because it didn't get close combat for a while, Conkeldurr was mainly used as this like drain tank where you would damage it, but it was so bulky it wouldn't take that much damage, and then it would hit you with Drain Punch and it would do a ton of damage to you, and it would heal all of its HP back. Basically, if you couldn't knock Conkeldurr out in one hit, you were often going to really struggle against it. It wasn't forced to use the Flame Orb item though. My first ever regional level event, I won with Leftovers on Conkeldurr, and then I won the national level event a couple months later with, I think, Cobra Berry Conkeldurr as a defensive item. Leftovers Conkeldurr would go on to win the World Championships back in 2011, in the first year of Conkeldurr's debut. Conkeldurr didn't do that well in the second year of Black and White, in part because Hitmontop was so popular and so prevalent, but in the final year of Black 2 and White 2 in 2013, Conkeldurr won the World Championships again with a different set, including a different item and a different ability. This was the year that some hidden abilities got released, and Conkeldurr now for the first time got access to Iron Fist, which boosted the power of all its punching moves by a flat 20%. This isn't as big a buff as the 50% boost that the Guts ability would give you, but it also didn't require your item. Because it freed up your item, many players started running the Life Orb item, and instead of using Drain Punch as their attack, they would use Hammer Arm. Pokemon in general in Black and White were just like less bulky because they had less stat points, and so Life Orb, Iron Fist, Hammer Arm Conkeldurr was doing ridiculous amounts of damage. Basically, if it hit a Pokemon for neutral damage, it would either one-shot them or come very close. Even Pokemon considered bulky at the time, like Rotom Wash, really struggled against Hammer Arm Life Orb Conkeldurr. Conkeldurr was one of the best Pokemon throughout all of Black and White, and it didn't really slow down in X and Y. It continued to perform there as well. Part of the reason for this is that Fairy-type Pokemon, at least to me, feels like they didn't really fully get online until kind of the end of X and Y or the beginning of Sun and Moon with the introduction of the Tapus. Like, yeah, Fairy Pokemon were around, but they just like weren't that strong. It was a lot of Pokemon like, I don't know, Gardevoir and like Azumarill, who are good Pokemon for sure, but they're just not as strong as like Tapu Koko or Fluttermane, right? So despite there being a new type in the game, and despite that type being the best type in the game, fighting type Pokemon were still able to shine despite it. However, in Sun and Moon, Conkeldurr was really not anywhere to be found, in part because Fairy type Pokemon were now officially running the show. But in Sword and Shield, Conkeldurr actually won an international level event as well as a regional level event. The international was won with the classic Guts Flame Orb set, but the regional was won actually with an Assault Vest set, which allowed Conkeldurr to both work as a Dynamax attacker or just as a regular attacker as well inside of Trick Room. Conkeldurr hasn't really seen any play in Scarlet and Violet to the point where I don't even think it was in the base game. It might have been added in the DLC, but I'm not even 100% sure because it just had no results. And I think that it probably could do well in the future, but it would be difficult, I think, just because of how much power creep there's been. That being said, it's a Pokemon that I really remember fondly, and I think it feels like a great example of a Pokemon that is like very strong, but also fair in a way that Pokemon nowadays don't really feel. So I don't know, for Conkeldurr's sake, I do hope that it does well again in the future. Which just leaves our top 2. And actually, I don't normally do this for these types of lists, but our number 2 slot is a Pokemon that has only been legal as of Scarlet and Violet. It's undoubtedly one of the strongest Paradox Pokemon, Iron Hands. I showed this list to my friend and she said, "Gee, Hariyama, how come your mom lets you have 2 slots on the list?" Which I thought was funny. Good joke, Scarlet. Iron Hands has won the World Championships twice. And Iron Hands has only been legal for 2 different World Championships, the 2023 and 2024 World Championships. This Pokemon has a 100% World Championship win rate. That's crazy. It's also won 3 different international championships and at least 12 regionals. It is by far one of the strongest Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet, and there's a case that it has the best results out of any Pokemon added in Scarlet and Violet. Typically, when you're talking about best Paradox Pokemon, the Pokemon that's competing for the first slot is Fluttermane, but Fluttermane only won the World Championships once, so I don't know, maybe Iron Hands is better. So what makes Iron Hands so good? You know, Conkeldurr won the world championships twice and we're like, yeah, like third best fighting type of all time. Iron Hands is better than Conkeldurr in every single way. Okay, and I guess I should technically say that the special attack stat on Conkeldurr is 5 points higher when it's a stat that neither of them uses. But on top of just being like a better version in terms of the stats, the electric secondary typing is also just better than not having a secondary typing. By being an electric type, Iron Hands gets access to moves that Conkeldurr just doesn't have, and electric has pretty decent synergy with fighting because it only adds one weakness and it cancels out your flying weakness, and it gives you some other resistances that you wouldn't have otherwise. Also, fighting types struggle to hit flying type Pokemon, which electric hits for super effective damage. So yeah, it's kind of just an upgrade in that sense too. Iron Hands also has access to Fake Out, which is a move that Conkeldurr does not. Fake Out, again, is one of the best moves in the game. The one area where Conkeldurr is better is that it has, I would say, better abilities than Iron Hands most of the time. But I mean, even without using its ability most of the time, Iron Hands is still just leagues better than Conkeldurr. It's actually kind of a mercy, I think, that Iron Hands doesn't have an ability that's very easy to activate. Iron Hands typically uses the Assault Vest item to make it even more impossible to get rid of, since its HP and physical defense are so high. Giving it a huge special defense boost just makes it impossible to get off the field. Iron Hands has a couple traits of many of the fighting types we talked about thus far. It works really well as a sponge to switch in and take, moves that would do a ton to your other Pokemon thanks to its ridiculous bulk. It supports the team with Fake Out support. It can heal itself with Drain Punch, but it also just is able to do a ton of damage thanks to its high base attack and decent coverage moves in Wild Charge and Heavy Slam. Basically, it's a Pokemon that you can't get rid of quickly, but you also can't ignore it because it does really good damage pretty much turn after turn. It's also a Pokemon that benefits a lot from Terastallization, in part because Pokemon like Amoonguss would be really hard for Iron Hands because it resists both its fighting and its electric moves, and it also doesn't care that much about Heavy Slam. But by using Terra Grass, Iron Hands is able to get around Rage Powder and just ignore Amoonguss right back. As a slow physical attacker, there's other good Terra types for Iron Hands too. Terra Fire can be really good to make it immune to burns. In certain formats, Terra Water was considered a better defensive Terra type, and actually Terra Bug won the world championships because of its specific type resistances. It can also fill a similar role to Scrafty and Hariyama as this kind of bulky but offensive Trick Room supporting Pokemon, where you can use Fake Out to help get Trick Room up and then try and do damage with Iron Hands inside of Trick Room. This isn't the most popular way of using Trick Room nowadays, but because Iron Hands is so bulky and it's just like such a good Pokemon, it's still able to pull off this strategy on teams that have Trick Room as an option but not as their primary strategy. It was actually this type of Iron Hands that won the world championships last year when paired with a bulky Farigiraf. Trick Room wasn't the primary strategy, but if you wanted to get Trick Room up, Iron Hands was great at facilitating it. And unlike Hariyama and to some extent Scrafty, Iron Hands certainly doesn't need Trick Room to be up because it's just so ridiculously bulky that it doesn't need to be moving first in order to be having an impact. The only formats that Iron Hands has not had massive success in since it's been released are the formats where it wasn't legal. It is entirely possible that over the course of the next couple of years, Iron Hands is undoubtedly one of the best fighting types of all time, and the only reason it isn't in the #1 slot is because, well, the #1 best fighting type of all time, nothing should be better than that. Most of you clicked on this video already being able to guess what the #1 slot is. Of course, it's Urshifu. And I'm lumping both Urshifu together here because they have so much in common. Similar to Iron Hands, Urshifu has won the 2023 and 2024 World Championships. Two fighting types won the World Championships in back-to-back years, and they were the same fighting types. They were even the same form of Urshifu. On top of that, Urshifu has won 3 internationals and at least 18 different regional championships. What's most impressive about Urshifu is that every result that I just listed happened in Scarlet and Violet. Those are only the tournament wins within Generation 9. And unlike Iron Hands, Urshifu spent the vast majority of the first year of Scarlet and Violet locked away in Pokemon Home jail. So it managed to win more than Iron Hands in less time. So what makes Urshifu so broken? Well, it's not an exaggeration to say that this might be the most broken Pokemon of all time. That's in part due to its ability Unseen Fist, which allows it to fully ignore Protect. Protect is the backbone of all competitive play. It has been for the entire time that I've been playing. It's the move that allows the game to function, where otherwise it would just become this crazy offensive positioning mess. And Urshifu just ignores it. This already would have been game breaking on its own, but it's not even the only ridiculous thing about Urshifu. Each Urshifu form also gets a signature move that always critical hits. This means that not only are they doing more damage, but they also ignore all stat drops that you can apply to Urshifu. Normally, when a physical attacker is running the game, Intimidate becomes more popular to help slow them down. But that doesn't work on Urshifu because it just ignores the stat drops with its critical hits. Urshifu Rapid Strike has an additional broken aspect to it, which is that its signature move, Surging Strikes, hits 3 times. This means that it's even able to KO Pokemon who are holding the Focus Sash item, which is an item intended to prevent a Pokemon from getting one shot, but because Urshifu hits 3 times, that counts as 3 separate hits, the Focus Sash doesn't activate. Urshifu only became legal with the first DLC of Sword and Shield, and by the time it was legal, all in-person events had been canceled due to the pandemic. The thing that you have to know about Sword and Shield's competitive scene is that these in-person events were replaced with 4 different online tournaments called the Players' Cups 1 through 4. These are commonly considered to be international level tournaments as players from around the globe could enter, though I don't think that Japan was able to participate in these. And because you were able to participate from home, they were really competitive because there was no like logistical barriers like cost or travel or time off work or anything. Each tournament had 3 phases, so it was pretty difficult to make it all the way to the championship. And yet despite that, and despite being a brand new addition to the game, Urshifu won half of the Players' Cup tournaments. I was responsible for one of those when I paired it with Colossal. That might sound like a joke to players who, you know, haven't played Sword and Shield, but yeah, Colossal was actually one of the best Pokemon. The one World Championship that Urshifu did not win that it was legal for was the World Championship in 2022. And a big part of the reason for that is that while Urshifu is broken, Dynamax as a mechanic helped to keep it in check. Dynamax allowed a Pokemon to double their HP, so even if Urshifu could hit through Protect, they could also just double their HP and yeah, make it so they weren't taking as much damage. That being said, Dynamax isn't here anymore, and while Dynamax helped to slow down Urshifu, Terastallization only ever helps it. Not only does Terastallization allow Urshifu to get a damage boost, but it can also help it to stay alive by turning off some of its weaknesses. Currently, it seems that Urshifu Rapid Strike is the better form, but that's in large part going to depend on what other Pokemon are legal. They tend to go back and forth, but Urshifu Rapid Strike has a slight edge because its moves hit 3 times, and we already talked about why that's so good. Looking back, it seems that the Pokemon who, I can only say was designed to break the game, successfully breaks the game. Good job, Game Freak. You did it. Another reason why Urshifu Rapid Strike is so good is because you're able to power up its water type attacks with rain. Some teams have had some success by pairing Urshifu Rapid Strike with Pokemon like Kyogre or Pelipper, who set up the rain manually, and Tornadus as well can use Rain Dance to help boost Urshifu even further. We might need Toxicroak to come back. Save us, Toxicroak, please. Another thing that makes Urshifu really powerful is that it's a flexible Pokemon. While both forms tend to have moves that they almost always run, there's a fair bit of flexibility when it comes to the item that Urshifu uses. Focus Sash and Choice Scarf tend to be the most popular, but other items such as Mystic Water or Black Glasses or Life Orb or even Safety Goggles have all seen some success. Urshifu can also run some supporting moves if it wants. Normally that takes the form of Coaching or Taunt in the final move slot, allowing it to have some utility in addition to just being able to do massive amounts of damage. My personal hope is that they never make a Pokemon stronger than Urshifu because I truly do not think that the game could withstand it. So for now, the #1 best fighting type Pokemon of all time is Urshifu. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you might like this other one I made talking about what the best ground type Pokemon is. I would say overall that the ground type Pokemon are more balanced than the fighting type Pokemon, but that actually made it a harder video to make.